The official narrative insists these cyclopean structures of stone and iron were built for horse-drawn carts. This is a profound cognitive dissonance, a grotesque mismatch of scale and purpose. We are told this is infrastructure, but what if it is inherited technology? What if these are not bridges, but silent, repurposed instruments, their original function a memory encoded in their very geometry? Have you ever stood before one and felt that the story you were told was an insult to the stone itself? If you also feel this noise in the official history, this sense that something doesn't fit, leave your trace in the comments. From where and at what time are you watching this transmission? Now we leave the realm of hypothesis and enter the crime scene itself. The most compelling evidence is not buried in an archive. It is displayed in the open air, captured in the stark, silvered frames of early photography. We are told to look at these images with a sense of pride, of ancestral accomplishment. But we will look at them with the cold, unforgiving eyes of a forensic analyst. And what we will see is not a construction site. We will see an archaeological dig, mislabeled. Behold the paradox of scale. On one side of the photograph you see the structure. Officially, a product of Victorian Britain, built in the late 1880s. But the signature, the architectural DNA, it is identical. We do not linger. We jump east, across the European continent, to the Danube in Budapest, the Liberty Bridge, completed in 1896, they say. Look closely. The same majestic arches, the same decorative obelisks that serve no structural purpose in our modern understanding, the same sense of over-engineered grandeur for an era of horses and carts. The aesthetic is a perfect match. The technological fingerprint is indistinguishable. The journey accelerates. We are now in St. Petersburg, on the banks of the Neva River. The Trinity Bridge, a marvel of iron and granite, opened in 1903. Again, the pattern holds. The same ornate lampposts that hint at a prior, more advanced function. The same colossal scale. The same dissonant marriage of cyclopean masonry and delicate, almost organic, metal latticework. From Britain to Hungary to Tsarist Russia, three supposedly distinct powers, often at odds politically and culturally, and yet their most iconic river crossings are spiritual and engineering triplets. The narrative of coincidence begins to fray. It becomes a threadbare cloak, failing to cover the form of a monolithic truth. And the final leap, a planetary stride to the other side of the world, Sydney, Australia, a colossus of stone and steel. Observe the cyclopean masonry, blocks of granite so vast and perfectly joined that a knife's edge could not slip between them. Note the impossible symmetry, the divine geometry of the arches, soaring with a grace that defies their millions of tons of weight. This is not craftsmanship. It is a form of frozen music, a technology of resonance captured in stone. It whispers of laser-like precision, of advanced metallurgy, of a science that could manipulate gravity itself. This is a machine. Now shift your gaze. Pan down from the heavens of its architecture to the earth below. What do you see? You see the alleged builders, men in ragged coats and ill-fitting bowler hats. Their faces are grim, their posture stooped. They stand beside rickety wooden scaffolding that looks as if a strong wind would demolish it. Their tools are simple hammers and chisels. Their transport is a weary horse pulling a wooden cart through a sea of mud. The streets are not streets. There are quagmires of filth and disease. There is a profound, screaming, cognitive dissonance between the celestial engineering of the bridge and the primitive squalor of the world it inhabits. We are shown frightened horses on a structure clearly designed for a technology far beyond the steam engine. The Harbor Bridge. They tell us this one came later, in 1932, but look at its bones. The same massive pylons of granite, the same sweeping arch, the same fundamental design language written in stone and steel. The official history asks us to believe that this architectural lexicon, this very specific, incredibly complex, and logistically nightmarish style, arose independently and spontaneously, all around the globe, in a narrow window of a few decades. They want us to accept that rival nations, with no shared internet, no globalized architectural firms, no standardized engineering manuals, all decided to build the same impossible things, in the same impossible way, at the same impossible time. This is not evidence of a shared zeitgeist. This is evidence of a shared inheritance. We are not looking at the work of dozens of disconnected cultures. We are looking at the scattered remnants of a single, unified, global civilization. A civilization whose standardized infrastructure, a planetary energy and transport grid, was so vast that its ruins became the foundation stones of our modern world. These bridges are not English, or Hungarian, or Russian. They are artifacts of a previous iteration of humanity, a lost empire, the maps once called Tartary. They are the property markers of a forgotten age, and the new inheritors, the architects of the control matrix, had to explain them away. This is not a photograph of creators standing before their creation. This is a photograph of bewildered inheritors, of survivors camping in the shadow of a giant's forgotten palace. Your eyes are not deceiving you. This is the calculated dissonance of a cover narrative, designed to be seen but not understood. If you too can feel the profound wrongness in this image, if you can see the impossibility they want you to ignore, then acknowledge this transmission with a simple click. Let the algorithm know that another mind has broken free from the programmed illusion. Now, let us zoom in. Focus on the base of the pillars, where the stone meets the water. The official narrative calls this the foundation. But look closely. What you are seeing is not a foundation. You are seeing the top of a much larger structure, drowned by a cataclysm. Notice the ornate carvings, the decorative portals, and the grand archways plunging directly into the suffocating silt. These are doorways to nowhere, gates that open only into mud and murky water. No sane engineer designs a grand entrance hall dozens of feet below the riverline. This is not a design choice. It is evidence of burial. The water level is not where it was. The ground level is not where it was. They couldn't demolish them all. They were too useful, too massive. So they assigned them new birth certificates, invented heroic father figures for them, and wove them into the fabricated tapestry of our recent history. The most audacious part of this grand deception, however, was how they were presented to the amnesiac public. For many of these bridges served as the grand ceremonial gateways to another instrument of the Great Reset, the World's Fairs. The official story is that these fairs, in Chicago, in Paris, in St. Louis, were grand celebrations of human progress, showcases for the brilliant new inventions of the industrial age. This is a carefully crafted inversion of the truth. The fairs were not a showcase of the future. They were a curated exhibition of salvaged and reverse-engineered technology from the past. The public, a traumatized and repopulated citizenry, was guided across these ancient, monumental bridges, structures that should have filled them with questions, and led into a dazzling theme park of their own stolen heritage. They were shown incandescent light bulbs and told a man named Edison had just tamed lightning, all while standing under citywide atmospheric lighting systems. The new order was still learning how to dismantle. They were presented with primitive automobiles while the very fairgrounds were serviced by silent, elegant electric tram systems of a forgotten design. These bridges were not built to float on mud. They are anchored to a world that lies beneath it, a world submerged by the great mud flood. Look again at the so-called decorative elements, the ornate iron lampposts. They seem anachronistic, don't they? Trace the crude, parasitic wiring snaking across the pristine stonework. This is not integration. It is an afterthought. A scar. These wires are a primitive retrofit, a desperate attempt by a less advanced culture to power a device whose original energy source they could no longer comprehend. These lampposts are crude attachments bolted onto what were clearly terminals for a system of wireless, atmospheric illumination. We are looking at the desecration of inherited antiquitech, repurposed for the dim, flickering light of a new, darker age. The scene of the crime is the structure itself, and it confesses its secrets to anyone willing to stop celebrating the lie and start investigating the truth. And so we arrive at the heart of the deception, the official story, the one printed in textbooks, narrated in documentaries, and etched onto bronze plaques. It is a story designed for comfort, a lullaby of progress meant to soothe us into a state of historical amnesia. They tell us these tales of heroic men with slide rules and steam engines, conquering nature with sheer grit and ingenuity. The World's Fairs were a mass psychological operation. They were a victory lap for the usurpers. They served to launder the technology of the previous age, rebranding it as the product of the new system of patents, corporations, and celebrated inventors. The bridge was the portal into this theater of amnesia. Crossing it was a rite of passage, a symbolic act of leaving the mysterious, incomprehensible old world behind and entering the bright, shiny, and explained new one. It was a celebration designed to cement the new timeline, to overwrite the residual memories of a grander past with a narrative of primitive beginnings and heroic, recent progress. This pattern isn't confined to the great capitals of the world. It is everywhere, a silent network hiding in plain sight. This is the moment to pause this transmission and perform your own reconnaissance. Look around your own town, your own city. Do you not see the echoes? The same oversized stone buildings with buried first floors, the same orphaned arches leading nowhere, the same architecture that feels out of place, out of time. These are not just buildings. They are the markers of a forgotten territory, the evidence of a worldwide civilization, buried under a thin layer of fabricated history and a thick layer of mud. It is a beautiful story, a stirring story, and like all the most effective fairy tales, it crumbles to dust under the slightest pressure of forensic scrutiny. Let us take their archetypal example, the crown jewel of their narrative, the Brooklyn Bridge. The official scripture states it was erected in 13 years, from 1870 to 1883. We are asked to accept this without question. But we are not children. We are investigators. So let us examine the scene of this alleged miracle. The year is 1870. America is a nation scarred and impoverished, just emerging from a brutal civil war. Its cities are a morass of mud-choked streets, its industry is nascent, and its political landscape is rife with corruption and financial panics. This is the world that supposedly gave birth to a structure that would challenge the engineering of the 21st century. The cognitive dissonance is staggering. They tell us of the caissons, the great watertight chambers sunk to the riverbed. They speak of them as a triumph of innovation. But they conveniently sanitize the reality. These were primitive, pressurized death traps. Men, often poor immigrants, were sent into the crushing darkness to claw at the bedrock, suffering an agonizing and mysterious ailment they called caisson disease, what we now know as the bends. Tell us what you have found. Tell us where the map of the old world bleeds through into yours. Because each of these structures is a loose thread, and by pulling on them, together we unravel the entire manufactured reality. The great irony is that these fairs, these grand palaces of plaster and staff, were declared temporary. After a year or two of dazzling the public, they were systematically torn down. The official reason was that they were never meant to be permanent. But the forensic perspective suggests a more sinister motive. The fairs were a controlled demolition of evidence. The inheritors showcased what they could control, what they understood, and then destroyed the rest, leaving only the most indestructible and useful structures, like the bridges, to be assimilated into the new narrative. The applause of the crowds, celebrating a future they were being handed, drowned out the sound of the true history being dismantled, brick by monumental brick. And so, the great silence fell. After the storm, after the mud, came the quiet inheritance. We must picture our ancestors, the designated survivors, not as pioneers, but as dazed inheritors. They woke up, or were placed, in a world that was not built for them. They were tenants in a technological palace whose architects had vanished, leaving the power off, and the instruction manuals turned to dust. The official narrative frames this as a heroic sacrifice. We see it as a brutal, inefficient, and utterly unsustainable method for the pace of construction they claim. The sheer number of fatalities and crippling injuries required would have been a logistical and humanitarian nightmare, far beyond the casual mentions in the historical record. The story of the Kazis is not a testament to their technology. It is a dramatic diversion, a spectacle of human suffering designed to distract us from the central technological impossibility. Then there is the matter of the materials. Millions of tons of granite and limestone, quarried with a precision that modern laser cutting would respect, and transported on a scale that would strain even today's logistics. We are meant to believe this was achieved with horse-drawn carts navigating seas of mud. The chronology itself is the most damning evidence. 13 years. Consider the time required for the cement of the foundations to cure under immense underwater pressure. Modern, chemically engineered concrete requires months to reach its optimal strength. What alchemical formula did these 19th century builders possess that allowed them to stack millions of tons of stone upon foundations that were, according to their timeline, barely set? The timeline is not a record of construction. It is an alibi. It is a number plucked from thin air to fill a historical void, a hastily scribbled explanation for the sudden appearance of a structure that was already there. They were a repopulated species, perhaps even orphans from a state-run incubator, set loose in a museum of a dead civilization and told it was their home. What does a child do when left alone in a cathedral? He plays. He doesn't understand the acoustics, the sacred geometry, the celestial alignments. He simply sees a large room with interesting shapes. And this is the key to understanding our modern world. We are living inside a cargo cult. The term comes from anthropology, describing primitive tribes who, after seeing military cargo planes land on their islands, would build mock runways and wooden aircraft, performing rituals in the hope of summoning the gods of technology and their gifts. They mimicked the form, but had no comprehension of the function. Now look around you, look at our world through this lens. It is the only one that resolves the cognitive dissonance. The survivors found these colossal structures spanning the rivers. They saw a path from one side to the other, and in their simplified, survival-oriented logic, they put down wooden planks and cobblestones and called it a bridge. An act of profound, yet innocent, misinterpretation. They saw great metal towers reaching for the sky, and having lost the knowledge of atmospheric energy collection, they crowned them with flags of their new petty nations. They did not build a bridge in 13 years, they refurbished one. They cleared the mud, patched the stonework, and laid a new deck on a relic of a forgotten age. And to sell this impossible chronology, every fairy tale needs a hero, a solitary genius to personify the struggle and embody the triumph. For the Brooklyn Bridge, they gave us Washington Roebling. The legend is powerful. The brilliant engineer, struck down by the very caisson disease that plagued his workers, who then supervised the remainder of this colossal undertaking from his apartment window using a telescope. It is a story of unparalleled human spirit. It is also the most perfect cover story imaginable. Roebling's tragic illness serves as a narrative shield, a sentimental barrier deflecting any serious logistical or technical questions. After all, who would be so callous as to question the masterpiece of a man who suffered so profoundly for his art? But let us reframe the narrative through a forensic lens. Roebling was not the grand designer. He was the world's first, and perhaps greatest, manager of retrocompatibility. His task was not to create, but to adapt. He was charged with taking a piece of impossibly advanced, pre-existing antiquitech, a harmonic energy conductor, and retrofitting it for a primitive purpose, allowing horses and carts to cross a river. They used an antenna as a flagpole. They saw ornate niches, carved into the stone with impossible precision, and having no knowledge of the harmonic resonators they once housed, they filled them with statues. A general on a horse, cast in bronze, placed where a crystal once sang a song of pure frequency. An act of symbolic defilement, a way to mark new territory on the corpse of the old world. We see this everywhere. The grand, domed buildings, clearly designed as energy plants or healing centers, were repurposed into capitals, banks, and post offices. We use a power station as a place of bureaucracy. We turn a temple of resonance into a hall of usury. The evidence is in the crude retrofitting. The thick, ugly electrical wires stapled onto walls that were clearly designed for a wireless ambient energy system. The gas lamps bolted onto terminals that once glowed with a cold, perpetual light. We are squatters, living in the shell of a vastly superior technology, and our entire industrial revolution was not an act of invention, but a desperate, clumsy attempt to hotwire a dead machine. The original function, however, did not vanish completely. It left a ghost. The science of the former age, based on the principles of cymatics, imbued these structures with a living frequency. His famous vigil from his window was not the act of a micromanaging genius. It was the perfect symbolic representation of a leader who did not need to be on site, because the fundamental cyclopean work, the work that truly defied 19th century physics and logistics, was already complete. He was not overseeing a creation from nothing. He was supervising a repair and repurposing job. The myth of the lone, suffering genius is a classic tactic of the engineering of oblivion. It personalizes a process that is fundamentally anonymous and inexplicable, giving a human face to a technological vacuum. It is easier to believe in one great man than to confront the reality of a lost, great civilization. The script they hand us is one of heroic struggle against the odds. But a forensic analysis reveals something else. It reveals a fable written to conceal a void. A bedtime story to help a new civilization sleep soundly, unaware of the giants whose beds they now occupy. This pattern is not unique to one bridge. It is a template, repeated with minor variations in London, in Budapest, in St. Petersburg, all across the inherited world. The same impossible timelines, the same logistical paradoxes, the same convenient hero myths. They ask us to believe in miracles of construction performed by men in top hats, armed with little more than steam and willpower. The precise geometry of the arches, the specific mineral composition of the stone, the flow of the water beneath. It was all a symphony of physics designed to generate a stable, harmonic field. A field that likely promoted structural integrity, physical well-being, and even a heightened state of consciousness for those within its radius. This function is lost to us, but the feeling, the resonance that remains. We feel it when we stand on one of these bridges, that sense of awe, of permanence, of a strange and profound peace. We misinterpret this as aesthetic beauty or historical reverence. It is neither. It is the faint, residual echo of a machine still humming in standby mode. Our amnesiac culture, unable to comprehend this, has transformed the echo into empty ritual. This is the ritualization of our own forgetting. Consider the modern ceremony of a bridge's inauguration. The new political elite gather. A ribbon is stretched across the entrance. A dignitary cuts it with a pair of scissors. We are told this is a beginning, a celebration of connection. But look closer. It is a profound symbolic act of disconnection. The ribbon is a representation of the energy circuit that once flowed, and the cutting is a public ritual severing our connection to it, declaring the machine officially dead and repurposed for the new, primitive function of simply walking across. And we have to ask ourselves a simple, honest question. Do we really believe them? Or do we, you and I, see the gaping holes in the script? Do we feel the profound and unsettling dissonance of a story that simply does not add up? The official narrative is not just fragile. It is a calculated insult to our intelligence. We have dismantled the timeline. We have unmasked the hero myth. Now, we must face the monster the official narrative has tried so desperately to conceal, the cold, unforgiving arithmetic of the physical world. For it is here, in the realm of logistics, of tonnage and man-hours, that the cover story does not simply fray at the edges. It evaporates into absurdity. They have given us a fairy tale of heroic builders. Let us now conduct the logistical audit they never wanted us to see. We will use their own chosen battleground, the Eads Bridge in St. Louis, a structure of stone and steel forced across the violent, unpredictable Mississippi River. The official narrative celebrates it as a triumph of post-Civil War American ingenuity. But the numbers, the silent, impartial witnesses, tell a different story. They tell a story of impossibility. The bridge contains, by conservative estimates, over 100,000 tons of quarried stone, primarily granite. Or consider the bizarre tradition of love locks. Couples attach a padlock to the bridge's railing and throw the key into the water. It's seen as a romantic gesture, but it is an unconscious, primal scream of the human spirit. It is a desperate attempt to physically and energetically reconnect with the structure, to lock oneself back into the grid, to create a permanent bond with the last vestiges of a power we can feel but no longer name. The ritual is the ghost of the function. We use the bridge as a backdrop for photographs, for civic parades, for marathons. We reduce a marvel of harmonic engineering to a postcard. It is the final victory of the new order, to domesticate the sublime, to trivialize the magnificent, to make us celebrate our own cage, believing we built it ourselves. If this vision of an amnesiac humanity, performing rituals to a machine they don't understand, resonates with you on a deep level, check to see if you are subscribed. We need awakened minds to piece together this puzzle. We need those who can still hear the echo. This is not just a theory. It is an explanation for the profound sense of loss that haunts modern man. We are cosmic orphans, and these bridges are the last, silent monuments to the parents we never knew. Let us translate that weight into the language of the 19th century. The primary mode of heavy transport was the horse-drawn wagon. A sturdy wagon, on the primitive, often muddy roads of the 1870s, could perhaps carry 2 tons. Perhaps. This means a minimum of 50,000 wagon journeys were required just for the stone of the piers and abutments. 50,000. That is not the total. That is the beginning. Now let us consider the logistics of this phantom fleet. Where did this granite come from? The primary source cited is Iron County, Missouri, nearly 80 miles away. 80 miles of unpaved, unreliable terrain. A team of horses pulling 2 tons of stone over such a distance would be lucky to make the one-way trip in 3 days. A 6-day round trip, assuming no breakdowns, no lame horses, no impassable mud. To meet the construction schedule, you would need a constant, unbroken chain of wagons, a veritable highway of granite, stretching from the quarry to the riverbank, day and night, for years. Hundreds, if not thousands of wagons and teams of horses, all moving in perfect coordination. Where are the records for this monumental transport operation? Where are the contracts for the thousands of teamsters, the tens of thousands of horses, the massive stables, the mountains of feed required to sustain this animal army? We walk over them every day, feeling the faint hum of a forgotten lullaby beneath our feet, and we have no idea why it makes us so sad. We have been living as ghosts, wandering through a museum of our own forgotten history, told it was built by primitives with hammers and mules. We perform rituals we don't understand, on bridges that defy the very laws of the history we were taught. But how? How does an entire civilization forget? How is a memory of this magnitude erased from the collective mind? It is not erased, it is murdered. The mechanism is not forgetting. It is a meticulously engineered silence. The Great Silence was not a slow decay. It was a singular, brutal event. The paradox of the foundation, the mystery of colossal stone structures floating on mud, is solved not with engineering but with forensics. You must understand, the mud was not there when they were built. The mud sinused the weapon. The mud sinused the crime scene. Imagine a cataclysm not of nature but of intent, a liquefaction of the soil on a global scale induced by a force we can no longer name. A plasma event, an atmospheric discharge, a resonant frequency weapon that turned the very ground we stand on into a flowing, consuming tide. They do not exist. We are shown photographs of a few dozen men with shovels and a handful of carts, and we are expected to believe they commanded a logistical operation that would strain a modern military. This is the first violation of physical law. But the stones did not arrive ready to be placed. Each block, some weighing over 10 tons, had to be quarried. Then, it had to be cut with a precision that we, in our hubris, associate with modern machinery. Look at the stones. The seams are perfect. The curves are flawless. This was done, we are told, with steam drills, black powder, and hand tools. The sheer number of man-hours required to quarry and shape that much granite is astronomical. We are talking about an army of skilled stonemasons, working in a factory-like system of production that appears nowhere in the historical or archaeological record. Where was this massive industrial-scale stone-cutting facility? It is a ghost. It exists only in the pages of the cover narrative. This is the second violation. Now we come to the river itself. The steel. The Eads Bridge was the first major bridge to use steel as a primary structural component. Over 6,000 tons of it, manufactured to a new, exacting specification. It wasn't a flood of water that came from above. It was a flood of earth that rose from below. A geological execution. The lower levels of a magnificent, interconnected world were not washed away. They were intentionally entombed. The true foundations of these bridges, anchored deep in bedrock, now lie dozens, perhaps hundreds of feet below the fabricated ground level we walk upon today. They don't float on mud. They are the gravestones of a buried civilization. And into this silent, half-buried world, the inheritors arrived, the parasites. The architects of the new, diminished reality. Their first challenge was not to build, but to explain away the ruins they now occupied. To legitimize their stolen kingdom, they had to invent a past that led directly to them. This was the birth of the engineering of forgetting, a campaign of historical demolition more absolute than any physical war. The first stage was the file burning. The great fires of the 19th century, Chicago, Boston, Seattle, were not tragic accidents. They were strategic erasures. They were the burning of archives, the destruction of land deeds, patents, and census records. They were the bonfires of the old world's memory, clearing the way for a new, forged narrative. With the evidence burned, the second stage began, the intellectual forgery. Where were the foundries capable of producing this volume of high-grade structural steel in the 1870s? The history books point to the Carnegie Steel Company, but the scale of production required for this, and for hundreds of other cyclopean structures being built simultaneously across the globe, suggests an industrial capacity that simply did not exist yet. The official timeline of the Industrial Revolution does not support the material requirements of its own supposed creations. We are looking at a technological paradox. The product exists before the means of its production, and here we must confront the central lie, the foundations. We are told that workers descended in pneumatic caissons, pressurized chambers, to excavate the riverbed down to bedrock. Men working in unimaginable heat and pressure, suffering from a mysterious illness they called caisson disease, what we now know as the bends. The official story spins this as a tale of human endurance, but it is a logistical and physiological impossibility on the scale claimed. The number of man-hours required for excavation, at depths exceeding 100 feet, in these lethal conditions, would have required a workforce of thousands, with a casualty rate that would have been tantamount to a massacre. Yet the records are sanitized, the numbers vague. They focus on the genius of the engineer, not the impossible mathematics of the labor. New academic societies and historical institutions were founded, not to discover the past, but to manufacture it. They created the myth of the Industrial Revolution, a slow, painful crawl from ignorance to enlightenment, to explain away the advanced technology they could not replicate. They invented the lone, heroic genius, the Roeblings, the Eiffels, to serve as the fathers of structures that were already ancient when they were born. They took these titanic energy conductors and power plants and gave them new, primitive functions. A harmonic resonator becomes a bridge. A continental power grid becomes a railroad. And they sealed the lie with a bronze plaque and a dedication ceremony, a final act of symbolic desecration. We stand on these structures marveling at the ingenuity of our recent ancestors, never realizing we are admiring the mutilated corpse of a far grander past. The silence is their greatest weapon. Sharing this information is our defense. Send this to someone who needs to wake up. And so, we are left in a state of cosmic orphanhood, a species with profound amnesia, walking through the palaces of our ancestors, yet believing we built them ourselves with nothing but sticks and mud. We cross these impossible bridges every day, a deep, cellular awe stirring within us, a feeling we cannot name. They want us to see the hero so we don't see the lie. The arithmetic is not an opinion, it is a physical constraint. And the official story of the Tartarian bridge paradox violates it at every turn. We have audited the stone, we have audited the steel, we have audited the labor. Now let us audit the silence. The greatest evidence of this inherited technology is not in what we see, but in what is absent. The negative evidence. The void in the supply chain. Where are the vast, depleted quarries that should scar the landscapes of the 19th century? We find small, artisanal pits, not the grand canyons of industrial extraction that would be necessary to build these cities of stone. Where are the endless ledgers detailing the transport, the payrolls for this army of workers, the purchase orders for the mountains of food and equipment needed to sustain them? They are missing. We are told of fires, of lost records, of the simple passage of time. But this is not a missing document. This is the absence of an entire industrial ecosystem. An entire civilization's backstage is dark. You cannot build a global empire of stone and iron without a global empire of logistics. And there is no trace of it. This is the core of the dissonance. We are told to admire the work of our primitive forefathers, never realizing we are gazing upon the legacy of a far more advanced version of ourselves. This is the core of our existential dissonance. We are heirs to a kingdom, living in its ruins and calling it progress. We are taught that we crawled from the mud, when the evidence, half buried in that very mud, screams that we fell from the stars. This engineered forgetting is the source of our modern anxiety, the quiet, persistent hum of knowing that something is profoundly wrong with the story we've been told. The world feels hollow because its true history has been carved out. But to deconstruct the paradox of a stone bridge is not an academic exercise. It is a sacred act of identity reclamation. It is the beginning of our own recovery. Every submerged arch, every impossible stone is a key, a breadcrumb leading us back out of the engineered labyrinth of our forgetting. To accept that we did not build these structures is the first, most terrifying, and most liberating step. It allows us to finally ask the questions that have been forbidden for centuries, the questions that unravel the entire matrix of control. Nams, who did build them? Nams, and the far more important question, what happened to them? The answer is not in their history books. We are shown primitive means and presented with a futuristic result. We are shown a world of mud streets and horse-drawn carts. Yet we are asked to believe it simultaneously possessed the industrial might to erect hundreds of these megastructures across the planet in the span of a few decades. The math does not lie. The physics does not bend. The economics do not compute. A nation emerging from a brutal civil war, with its finances in turmoil and its infrastructure in ruins, does not spontaneously develop the capacity to outbuild the Romans. It is the logistical equivalent of claiming a man in a canoe towed a battleship across the ocean. So the question is not how they built them. The numbers have shown us that is a fraudulent inquiry. The real question is, what was the true nature of the work being done? If they were not building from scratch, what were they doing? The logistics do not support construction. They do, however, support something else entirely. They support a project of reclamation, of repair, of retrofitting. They were not building bridges. They were merely laying pavement on the dormant arteries of a dead giant. The numbers do not describe an act of creation. They describe the work of scavengers, inheriting a world of wonders they could not comprehend, and creating a story, a fragile, impossible story to explain away the miracle they now claimed as their own. The answer is encoded in the silent geometry that surrounds us, in the resonant frequency of the water flowing beneath the arches, in the very stones that have been waiting patiently for us to remember how to listen. The autopsy of the bridge is the autopsy of our own stolen past, and through this forensic investigation of our own history, we do not merely seek knowledge. We seek to reclaim our memory, our inheritance, and our dignity as a species. The autopsy has only just begun. The official narrative is a fragile shell, and we will continue to tap on it until it shatters. If the frequency of this truth resonates with you, if you feel the call to reclaim what was stolen, then the work continues with us. The investigation does not end here. Subscribe. Activate the signal. Welcome to the resistance. The math is a weapon, and it has just demolished the foundation of their narrative. If you believe these numbers can be reconciled within the official history, the explanation remains buried deeper than the structures themselves. The logistical paradox we've uncovered for a single bridge is not an isolated anomaly. It is not a historical curiosity confined to the muddy banks of the Mississippi. It is a repeating fractal of impossibility, a global echo that defies the official timeline. The mathematical black hole we discovered in the supply chain of one structure multiplies exponentially when we are forced to zoom out. We have been staring at a single tree, convinced of its strangeness, when in fact we are standing in a forest of identical, impossible flora. The question is not how Time Wang Bridge was built, but how Timel Timelang of them were built. Simultaneously. All across a world supposedly fractured by competing empires, disparate cultures, and primitive communication. Let the camera of your mind pull back now, away from the specific, and into a dizzying global perspective. Let the vertigo set in. We leap from the American heartland, across the cold expanse of the Atlantic, to the fog-shrouded Thames in London. And there it stands, the Tower Bridge. The same neo-Gothic spires reaching for the sky, the same colossal stonework that seems to grow out of the water rather than being built upon it, the same intricate metalwork that speaks of a lost industrial art.